Islamic education. Very ordinary, what we might consider mundane issues, which perhaps we are lucky enough to have some way of discussing, but a lot of women don't have that opportunity. So that's the first thing I would say. So how do we measure reality versus utopia? And one of the things that I like to bring out in this discussion is that you all as intelligent university students will know that there are debates going on about what exactly are the rights of women in Islam. It's a very important debate. I'm not a theologian, so please don't ask me any fiqh-related questions about women's rights. But that's an important discussion going on. But what I think we can do for those of us like me who are not theology scholars is to go away and think about the fact that there are already so many rights that are acknowledged for women which women don't get. And can we start working in that space, at least to give the rights that we already acknowledge as a community, and in parallel with the fact that there's this theological discussion going on as well. The second thing I would say, which I mentioned at the beginning, is that it's very easy for us to identify oppression when it's a lack, when it's a scarcity, when somebody is denied the rights that they have, and that's obviously what I'm talking about for women here. But I think there is another kind of oppression, which is the oppression of extravagance. And I'm going to turn to look at the brothers here, because I think sometimes when you have too much privilege, that is a form of oppression as well, because it doesn't kind of go deep into your souls, that you can really appreciate who you are as a human being. And I think that dynamic is not really talked about in our community, that although it's very difficult and damaging for women not to have their rights, I think it's equally damaging for our brothers as well. And I think balance is a much better place for our community to be in. And of course, I'm sure all of you have been to an Islamic wedding, and you will all have heard the wonderful verse talking about how men and women were created in pairs. Well, the whole point of a pair is that it's in balance, and that's how you get a successful relationship. And I would suggest that a model for a society is the same balance that you have in a marriage. If you can have a community of two people in balance, I think that's a model we can extend to a wider community as well. Now, the kind of things that normally would get thrown back at me at this point, so let's just get them out into the open, is that, well, if we're talking about women's rights, you know, you obviously become a Western feminist and you want to destroy the entire fabric of the Islamic nation. We can discuss that in the Q&A if you really want. I think this is really about trying to make our communities the best it can be, the most Islamic it can be. And I think it has to be about men and women working together. So that's why I bring up this idea of the balance and the pair, because oftentimes, and I'm so pleased that there are so many brothers here, so well done for the Beta Islamic Society. Oftentimes it's just a lot of women sitting around talking to other women about how oppressed women are and how we need more rights. It's preaching to the converted. So it's really vital, in my opinion, that men and women need to talk about this between each other. And so, as I kind of come towards a conclusion, there are just some suggestions that I want to put out for discussion, because as you will have gathered from the tone of my presentation, I think it's good to discuss the issues, but it's good to have an action plan of how we're actually going to make some change and create a new kind of society. So the first thing I would say is that it's really important for men and women to share their experiences of what it's like to be that particular gender. And obviously I'm a woman, as you may have noticed, and so I'm going to throw some questions out there from a female perspective that I would want to have my experiences shared. And I went away and wrote a book so that people could try and work out what it is that Muslim women are experiencing. So for example, have the brothers experienced what it's like to go into a vast and enormous mosque and find that you have to pray in literally the little corner behind the black smelly curtain that hasn't been washed since the mosque was built. I'm not laying a complaint at this stage, I'm just saying sometimes you need to experience what it's like to really know the reality of it. Or, you know, that you're not allowed onto a committee in the mosque because you happen to be a woman. One of the committees that I wanted to join had some rule where you couldn't be the only woman, you had to have more than 3 women or something. And then if you did go to the committee, you had to sit at one end of the table and all the men sat at the other, so that they couldn't really hear what you were saying. So again, I'm not debating the rights and wrongs, I'm just trying to say we need to have a discussion about the experience of the other gender. You know, what does it feel like when you want to ask the imam a question and you find that the response is not given to you with eye contact, but is given to the floor? Again, I'm not debating the rights and wrongs, it's just an experience. And I think these are the kind of things that we need to talk about from both sides, because I think often the sisters don't really know what their brothers are experiencing either. So that's about shared experiences. So here are some ideas that maybe we can pick up in the Q&A that I think we can help in. When I talked at the beginning about creating this space for Muslim men and women, getting rid of this wall and having a space for discussion. So the first one is to hear more Muslim women's voices. And I specifically say women to the point that Amina was raising earlier, because there's such an absence of women's voices. So little portrayal and expression about Muslim women, whether it's in the Western media or whether it's in the Muslim community. And let women talk for themselves. Often, again, both sides are very quick to jump in to talk about Muslim women. One that I think is particularly strong is to make sure we don't define women by what they wear. And again, all the debates we hear about the niqab and the hijab and the burqa and you name it, there's a whole list of words. I think Muslims and people who are not Muslim are equally guilty of trying to define Muslim women by how they look. So in the newspaper, you know, you would think the only thing that Muslim women are worried about is whether they wear a niqab or not. But equally, if you go to the mosque, the entire spiritual status of a woman is defined by how she looks, not by how much she prays or who she looks after in the home. So I think we have to be very conscious of that. I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, men and women need to have a bit more discussion between them. And I think Muslim men and women need to become a positive force in the global debate around gender rights, and say that Islam does have something positive to say about the interaction of the two genders and the way that they relate to each other and the rights that they have. And I think that's a really important thing for Islam to do as a whole. And then I would say, finally, to women specifically, I think it's very important that when there is something that you feel is not right about the way that women are treated, that you are brave enough to speak about it. Because in some traditional cultures, and I come from an Asian background, so I have this experience myself, it can be very frightening to speak out or to ask for participation or to get involved, because there is so much worry around reputation or that this will have repercussions on you. But the only way that we can create that change, and Allah will bless your efforts, and I can testify to that, is for us as women to actually put forward our voices and make sure that whatever we feel is the right thing, and may Allah guide all of us, is actually said and put out there. Because people are not psychic, they can't know what it's like to be a woman and have the experiences that Muslim women have unless we actually talk about them. So I'd say be brave and don't worry, Allah will look after us. So in conclusion, what I would say is I think there are two areas of stereotype, two areas where I think we really need to address ourselves when it comes to this topic. The first one is that we can't just kind of tinker around the edges when it comes to adjusting the role of women in Islam, the role of Muslim women. And we can't just blame the West for the terrible oppression of Muslims and Muslim women. You know, if the West wasn't there, I think we would still be challenging ourselves with these issues of Muslim women. So I think that's something we need to address. And the second thing I would say is that we need to make sure we're visionary enough to realize